All right, so solutions in agriculture. I'm going to start by saying, how you doing?
Okay.
Okay, yep. What I really mean is, how are you doing?
Not so good since the prices dropped.
Absolutely. This is a little more serious than just how you doing, isn't it? How you doing? I mean, we're going to talk today about improvements and yields you'd like to get and goals that you have on the farm. But we're not going to talk about corn price because frankly, I can't fix it and neither can you. And we're sure not going to talk about milk price because I can't fix it and it appears neither can you. Okay? Well, that's a good stand of corn. That's why I got a drum roll. Everybody's corn look like that? Yeah, pretty much, yeah. I got a stalk that looks like that. Got one that looks like that. Every collar is just about the same out of the ground. Every stalk's about the same size. This is tremendous corn. We know the corn's had a good day every day here. Or does your corn look a little bit like that? Yep. This is coon hunting corn. Absolutely. I can get out in the field and I can stand right there and I can shine. I don't have to worry about this stalk being in my way. I got plenty of room. You plant this next to the pasture, and if the cows get out, they can walk through it and not damage a doggone thing. Seriously, what's the difference between this and this? Precision planting would be a big part of it. How many bushels? Yield. I mean, look at the different collar heights here, all the way across. Look at the skips. This is there's about 11 stalks that should be there. So this is only a third of a thousandth of an acre. How many bushels is there between these two choices? About 60? Who said that? 60 bushels is about right. Give him a hat. 60 to 90 bushels. You got 7 right there because that stalk's gone. You got 7 right there because that stalk's gone. You got another probably 7 there because that one's not going to put an ear on. It came up late enough. It isn't even going to put a harvestable ear on. We know that because we've gone out to fields and we've done this. We've taken the thousandth of an acre and we harvested every year on that 17.5 feet a row, and we did it a whole bunch of times. And about 15 to 20% will end up here, up in that top pile. If you can't read it, that says 238 bushel. I know that's more than you're probably getting here, but the point still is that there's 70 bushels difference between here and here. That says 168. That number is very consistent. 70 bushels between the top pile and the bottom pile, and the other number that's disturbingly consistent is a third of your ears lie down here in the bottom pile. And I'm not talking about the little bitty ears that we throw out. I'm talking about of the good ears, 1/3 of them lay here in the bottom pile. And they're 70 bushels off of the top pile. Folks, if we can move this pile up into this pile, just doing a better job, there's 25, 30 bushels the acre to be gained. So we're going to talk about how to do that today. So, as Sean said, we're going to talk about the top 5 factors. And we're going to talk about them as the top 5 factors, just like Marty. Marty went to the Ohio State. Anybody know why they call it the Ohio State? Yeah, because they're the arrogant people. No. Because they're the only one that is the Ohio State. They wanted to make a designation between Ohio State and the other Ohio universities and such. And these are the top 5 factors. They're the only ones, and they are important. Conditions at planting. 5 to 50 bushels difference here, guys, on the day you plant. Sean and I did a plot a couple years ago, and we started and we planted the first 2 hybrids, and we were like, this is just a little damp. We're going to wait a couple days and come back. We waited a couple days, we came back, we planted that plot again. And this is the difference between almost good enough and just right, and we got 12 bushels. So I can tell you that when you're out there planting into conditions that are way too wet, I'm not kidding you when I say there's 50 bushels. And it's not 50 bushels to be gained. Remember, yesterday we were talking about this. The National Corn Growers Contest was won by a guy who got 544 bushels this year. And we know that corn has genetic potential to go way higher than that, 600 or 700. And I'm not saying whether that was a profitable crop or not, that's not the point. The point is the crop has that potential, and everything you do to it reduces yield. When you plant, the day you plant, you're making a decision about how many bushels you're going to take off of that top yield. If you do it just about right, somewhere between 5, 10. If you do it just right, you may get all its genetic potential. If you do it really poorly, you're going to lose 50 bushels. You gave up 50 bushels that day. When Sean talks about, up here is early planting, and down here is late planting, and you got a little bit of a line downhill there. Hey, you go out and plant wrong, and you're starting down here. You started 50 bushels shy. You gave it up right off the start, okay? Seed placement. This is depth as well as spacing between seeds. Another 10 to 40, 50 bushels here as well. If you aren't planting as deep as you should be, if you're laying it on top of the ground, if you're not getting the slot closed, all of those things, 5 to 50 bushels here as well that you have the opportunity to select or give up. Seed quality, and I'm going to show you some pictures on this, but when we do seed quality, we take your corn seed and we subject it to 50-degree temperatures for 4 days in a row. Then we raise the temperature and see what percentage germinates. At that point in time, the industry standard is 80% has to germinate. On both the product lines we sell, 85% has to germinate. We'll see that there's some conditions out there that we plant into that don't really meet this particular standard to start with, but that's what quality seed's about. Right hybrid, right variety, in the right field. 75% of all hybrids don't end up in the field they ought to go in. Heck, 75% of the time they don't even go in the field that we recommended they go in. We know there's really good drought-tolerant hybrids. We know there's ones that are better on cold tolerance. We know there's ones that just handle overall stress better. We know there's ones that have disease packages. And yet we can't even seem to get them in the right field. We find ourselves taking the first hybrid that's in the front of the shed and planting that next because we didn't have a plan or because we didn't want to follow the plan. Pre- and post-planting management. This is everything that you do to protect yield at all costs. And you all go, protect yield at all costs? In these prices? That's crazy. It is crazy, but it's a philosophy that you have to adapt. You're still going to do the math on it. You're still going to try and figure out whether or not I can get enough bushels, and hopefully between Dean doing some studies and Bruce is always good at taking a look at some products and things and seeing how they perform in your area, and the seed team and my field and Sean, we have a good idea which things you can add. They're going to make you money. So we'll talk about those too. Can anybody read this? 35. That's May 10th. That's in my front yard. Right off the side of the yard. In the dirt. It's bare dirt. The night before it was 55. That's at seed depth. Didn't know temperatures went up and down that much. I didn't. Talked to a lot of folks that said, I don't think that's right. I said, I did it. It's right. Okay? What we had is we knew we were coming to May 9th and 10th here. We had a couple freezing nights in a row. When I came in the night before, I stuck this thermometer in the ground because I wanted to see just how much temperature goes down, and we were talking, it's a cool spring so far. How good are we doing out there? So I stuck it in the ground next to the house there, 55 degrees. Probably not the warmest soil in the world to start with. But the point is, it was 35 degrees there. Drove up on the hill to where some corn was planted, 41 degrees. Drove to another field real close by, 44 degrees. Found another field that was down about 40. Found another one about 11 o'clock in the morning that was up to 47. All those numbers are below what we test your seed at. So when we say conditions of planting, we mean the day you plant, plus about the next 4. That plant has to have, that seed has to have the opportunity to germinate and get started. Once it germinates and gets started, it can tolerate an awful lot. But if you kill it right up front, you've just plain killed it, okay? And this spring I went on a treble call. The guy said, on my 16-row planter, I split the planter. I got half, 8 rows, is one hybrid. The other half is another hybrid. And he says, the one hybrid didn't come up. So I went down and we took a look. Walked into the field, sure enough, this hybrid's got about 10% stand. That one doesn't have good, it's 60, 65%, but there's something there. It's harvestable. I said, when did you plant this? He says, well, it was April 24th. I know it was cold. You can see the slots were a little bit open and there's things that I did wrong. But he says, by God, that's a seed quality problem. I said, yes, sir, it is. It's a seed quality issue. It's not necessarily a seed quality problem. Because you planted it below the conditions that we would even expect it to grow. Yes, that hybrid did better than that one, and that's a lot issue. That lot of seed compared to that lot of seed. You know, certain lots of seed can actually have a little better cold germ than others, but it's not a seed quality issue. He had good quality seed. He put it in conditions it couldn't survive. I said, is this the only field you planted today, this day? And he says, no, I planted 125 acres that day. I wanted to get started. I got rolling. I got a 16-row planter. Man, we hammered it in. So we drove over to some of the other fields. Next field we went to, we drove in and we stopped. As we walked down the hillside, it's all there. Probably about a 95% stand on both hybrids. Couldn't tell the difference between the hybrids. He goes, I don't believe this. Planted the same day. I said, I do. Small differences in temperature, when you get down below that standard, all of a sudden it falls off and germ goes to heck. As we went down the field, we started to see the differences again. We got into the loamy soils, a little cooler, a little damper soils. The one hybrid was doing a little poorer, and then when we got down to the clay bottom, it looked like the first field. So for a number of reasons, probably because he didn't close the slots good again down in that clay soil, because it was too wet, shouldn't have been there. But the point is, not a seed quality issue, that's a planting condition issue. So you got choices to make. This is December in Strongstown. Woo! It was 11 degrees that day. My wife had to go into Dollar General there in Strongstown and get a couple things.
You made it clean on a motorcycle.
What's that? Car wouldn't start, right. Motorcycle always starts. So she says, you going in with me? I said, hell no. I gotta talk to this guy. I sat there, waited till he come out. He goes, I got a snowmobile suit. And he did. He had a snowmobile suit that looked like an army uniform from the 50s. I mean, there was no way he was getting cold. That was his plan. The only point in this is, there's things you can do that don't make them a good decision, okay? So back to what Sean's talking about. I'm going to talk to you about these 3 questions in a little bit different way. If you ever thought of these 3 questions, you need to think of these 3 questions. Where do you want to take your yields? And I will tell you that that means in the next 3 to 5 years. You want to plan. What are we doing this year? What are we doing next year? What are we doing the year after? Where do I want to take my yields? What's your plan to get there? And what's keeping you from getting there? What you doing, Katie? Well, it's perfect timing. So she comes up, and I was just about to ask you, have you ever asked your salesperson those 3 questions? Has your salesperson ever asked you those 3 questions? So maybe we need to get together on that. Because these are important questions. This is how you're going to decide what's your next move going forward. How you're going to stay in this arms race that we call agriculture. So obviously, You gotta have some goals and objectives here, but I'm gonna say that even though this is question number 1, you gotta do some background work before you can decide what your yield goal ought to be. Question number 2, this is where you're really sitting down with Katie, and Katie can bring in Bruce or myself or Sean, whoever she needs for help to answer the questions that we've got to answer on your farm and decide, maybe it's the My Field team, maybe it's Mike Gardner with the precision planting. There's a lot of places to gain you some money, and we're going to talk about those. But this is where decisions get made. Ad infinitum. That's a cycle that goes on and on. We do it every year, we do it every year. The lemmings, they do it, I don't know what that cycle is, but they run off the cliff. You know, yes, Scott, if all your friends jump off the cliff, then you should too. It's the lemming way of doing things. And we do that a little bit sometimes. We've got to get out of that habit. And this is where the lemmings are going to decide, okay, that didn't work so well. What's our plan? Reflect and improve the process. What are the things on your farm that happened last year that you're not going to allow to happen again? I'm going to stop here for just a minute. What's the reason for a plan?
So not to fail.
So not to fail. And in the decision-making process, if I'm planning, what am I not doing?
Yes.
Guessing, obviously, and reacting. It takes the emotional piece out of it. When I sit here right now, when I'm selling my corn or selling my milk and I can't pay all my bills, it's a very emotional decision to not add 10 more bucks to the cost of raising a crop. Absolutely. Very, very emotional decision. But if I take that back to when I'm out standing in the field and I see that I lost plants here, and we figure out that that's white grub, I can do the math here. I know that if we look, well, if I ask my seed guy, I'll know that I could gain about 1,500 plants on average, sometimes only 500, but sometimes 5,000, by having an insecticide in furrow, something like Capture. That costs about 10, 11 bucks an acre, and it's going to get me about 10 bushels. So 1,500 plants, so 1,500 plants is going to get me about 7 bushels. So you do the math there, and all of a sudden it's like, well, that's a pretty good trade-off. That's not an emotional decision, that's a factual decision. That's a good place to start. So once again, 3-year goals. Am I going to increase my yields 30 bushels? I can guarantee you if we just start planting into better conditions, we can get 20 of that. Am I going to increase my soybeans 15 bushels? Am I going to be more profitable? Or am I going to lose less money? I'm not sure. This is a tough business right now. Here's Sean's buddies. They invented that wheel again, and he says, what'd I invent? And he wants to know what the heck that's for, and she's going to grind some grain with it. Why, he made a yo-yo. He made a wheelbarrow. Look at this guy down here. He's going to be on the shopping channel. He's going to make more than the rest of them all together. The point in this is your plan, and your plan, and your plan, and your plan are all going to be different. Whatever you need most is going to be different on each farm. What you would use that for, or what you would decide to change on your farm is going to be different. So when does the plan begin? When do you start a plan?
Last fall.
Last fall. Great time to start planting when you're harvesting, right? Absolutely. In the combine maybe, you can see what's coming off. How about during scouting visits in the summer? Is that a good time? That's when I can see how many plants I lost. I'd argue that the time to start a plan is probably at planting. I mean, this is when Katie or Bruce can come out and they can look at the seed that's in the planter, check out the quality of the seed, talk to you about your planting depth. How's it going? What do we see? Are these conditions exactly right? Or do we know we've sacrificed something up front? Get yourself a trusted advisor who does this a little bit and ask them to help you make that decision. Here's another time to make a plan. I found a problem. This problem here happens to be slugs. Can you see them on the slide very well? Sean and I were down planting a plot in Accident, Maryland, and you can see the seed right over there. And we had more slugs on top of the ground than I mean, there literally were millions and millions and millions of them there. Most we'd ever seen. Planted the plot, came back 2 days later, and this is what we found. Germinated seed, and every time we'd pop up a seed that we found, there'd be 2 slugs in the slot right above it, just waiting for it to get a little bit of green material on it and get going. If you left him, this is what he did. We found some of these. He actually had his head stuck in the seed. Sean says, that's bullshit, I've never seen that before. I said, yeah, come over and take a look at this. I took a picture of it for you. So we looked around, and they actually rasped the top off of that seed. They were that hungry, and they hollowed out the seed. See how nice? They just cleaned all the goodies out of it. This is slug pressure. So this piece here is about protecting yield at all costs. We recommended to the farmer that he puts Deadline Bullet on this crop, which is a bait for slugs. It cost him somewhere between $25 and $30 an acre. So it was a fairly expensive treatment to go and do the 50 acres or so that he planted that day. This is pretty big math. But with the number of slugs we had, we'd had about a 5% stand. He ended up with 27,000 plants. When we harvested the plot, we got about 180 bushels. Not perfect, but very, very good yield, and planted June 6th. That calendar date thing, that's one of these plots that Sean talks about. Planting into good conditions is way, way more important than what date you planted. So this is an example of protecting yield. This is at Dean's test plots out in Hershey. And they harvested one of those fields out there in January. And this is just some BT corn, and you can see how well it's standing. And I'm not going to tell you that every BT hybrid stands this perfectly, but the point is we've got products and we've got decisions, irritations we have solved along the way that we now take care of in a pretty solid fashion. January harvest, and it's all standing there waiting for it. This is unprotected yield. This is barley down in Curryville. Guy's a really good farmer. He gets between 100 and 120 bushels the acre on his barley every year. He plants it heavy, puts a lot of manure on it. He does a fantastic job. But you can see the leaf diseases it got. Had he put a fungicide on this, he would have retained the yield that he usually gets. As it was, he got 67 bushel average on this crop. $133 to the acre difference between unfungicide and with fungicide. So there was plenty of room to pay for fungicide on a crop like this. Would have paid him back for 10 years running. Too stressful. I say too stressful because this is a corn crop that had disease, and you can see some stalk disease and root disease and such, but it also was under drought stress. And if we'd applied a fungicide here, we probably wouldn't have lost this crop in here to the disease the way we did, or at least not as bad as we did. Every time you have a second stress, it's like tenfold whatever the first stress is. So if the leaf disease is going to cause you a little bit of pressure and you're going to lose a little bit of yield, and you add the second one, it's going to be about 10 times that, whether it's in standability or yield or whatever. Second stress, always about tenfold the trouble. And here we are back to this. So what is the solution here? What are the things you'd start applying here to change this? Anybody would think about anything? You said precision planting earlier. Might get a better stand to start with.
Seed spacing.
Seed spacing, yep. So it could be meters,
And
downforce.
depth probably too.
Depth control would be a tremendous help here. Could he have lost some of this to insects? Yep. Could have lost it to grubs. Could have lost it to slugs. I would argue that to decide what happened here, we had to decide earlier. We had to be out there sooner. This is a little too late to make the decision on maybe what the problem was. And this is why the plan starts throughout the season. From the day I plant, I need to know what I did and work that through to July or so, where I'm really starting to put things down on paper that are going to be good decisions for me. Here's a bunch of the causes that it could have been. Depth, moisture, residue. Could have pinned a lot of residue in there. Maybe those seeds didn't come up. Temperature, seed quality, compaction. Could have some rows that we, tracked across there. We didn't get the seed in the ground. Disease, insects, chemical burn, fertilizer burn. Lots of choices. So here's a few of the planting problems that we could take a look at to see if these are what's causing it. Remember, singulation alone is probably 6 to 9 bushels that we could get back. Ground contact, so down pressure and depth control, somewhere in that 8 to 16 bushels the acre. And guys, I really have seen yield damaged by soil conditions by being too wet as much as 50 bushels the acre. Tremendous amount to be lost there, and the same thing here. So here's just a little thing by Precision Planting, and they had some meters that were doing 96% singulation. That's the one seed, one seed, one seed, one seed. And they put on some Precision Planting meters that put it up to 99.7 singulation. One seed, one seed, one seed all the time. They got 8 3/4 bushels times $3.50 corn. That's $30.63 per acre. On a 200-acre farm, that's $6,125. Anybody in that 200-acre category here? I know there's some. Anybody planting 200 acres? Yep, got a couple back there. So this is a $200 investment per row, just to upgrade seed meters. So if you got a 6-row, you invested $1,200 and you got $6,100 back. I get it. If there isn't enough money in the checkbook, there's not enough money in the checkbook, right? Well, there'll be less money in the checkbook if I don't do it come this same time next year. So let's be careful. Let's think it through. Let's see what our real possibilities are. This is where some of our numbers come from. I probably should have put this slide in earlier. But if we're missing 1 ear per 1,000, we're missing 7 bushels to the acre. Okay? So all I have to do is miss 1 ear. So if you've got 27,000 ears per acre, and I can bump you to 28,000, I can get you 7 bushels there. Just by getting 1 more 1,000 ears per acre. So population, Sean's study that population doesn't matter is right as long as they're spaced properly and everything. But when I've got skips and such, I can gain you an extra 7 bushels. So let's think about that. This is air force. This is the first down force control improvement you could make over springs on the planter. And you're talking about 8.2 bushels average per acre. Once again, we can do the math on 200 acres. At 1,640 bushels, it's $5,740 a year. This particular upgrade costs somewhere in that $6,000 to $7,000 range. Okay? You're saying, well, it didn't pay for itself. But I don't expect equipment stuff to pay for itself the first year. You'd like to see it pay back in 3 years. This is easily going to pay back in like 1 1/4. This is a huge improvement. And remember that you guys are no-till and you're in Pennsylvania soils. I'd argue that this 8.2 bushels is more like 10 or 12 here. But we'll use their numbers. It's Midwest data. Delta Force is the new hydraulic piece, and you're going to get 16 bushels the acre, and it does every row individually. It's got a load cell deciding whether I need to lift on the row unit or press it down harder. If you, well, just 2 days ago I was at a farm, and the guy said he's got Delta Force on his planter, and he said we were working on the planter, and he couldn't recall, or I can't recall what he was doing. He said they drove the pickup truck out to the planter. and backed up to it and drove away. Got some parts or whatever off. And he says, on my downforce map, you can see the pickup tracks. The thing is so sensitive that where he had compacted the soil, and he's no-till, where he'd compacted the soil, pulling out there with the truck, it had to jack the force up a little bit to get the planter in the ground as it went across those rows. So that's why we can get the 16 bushels, but like I say, I'm going to tell you, in our Pennsylvania soils with our varied conditions, and all the things we do, driving manure trucks across, and just all the things that we do, it's more than the 16 bushels. This one is for V-drive and V-drive and V-set. Now V-set is the vac meter system that literally one seed all the time. Got a grower that his fell below 99.5%. He was down to 99.1, and he called me and he says, I can't get this thing to plant. I said, well, what's it running? He says, 99.1. He says, that little seed just won't plant. I said, well, before we put the V-sets on there, what were you getting then? He goes, I think we were at 94. I said, so that's 6% difference. This is 0.6% difference. I think we've made an improvement. We can't be quite that picky. We're over 99%. I get it, there's dollars left, but no other system will give us that kind of accuracy. So here, they're saying, and I'll have to read this to you, you'll have to kind of let me tell you. It says they got 5 bushels out of putting the V-sets on. And then it also says that on the 400 acres planted, they had 32 acres that used to be overlapped. That now, because they put the on-off switches on it with the V drives, they didn't have any more overlap. So it saved them 32 acres worth of overlap. Now that's 8%. Talking to Mike Gardner, he said here in Pennsylvania, he says 12, at least 10, but he says more often 12. And sometimes 15% because of our smaller field sizes and the number of places we're overlapping. Funny shaped fields and that kind of stuff. But anyway, for the purpose of their data, we'll cut to the chase here. Annual potential corn return, $19,000. Initial investment was $25,000. So I asked Mike also, I said, so what did that include? He goes, well, for it to be $25,000, they must have put a monitor on the planter. It must not have had the monitor, and then they did the V-drive meters and the V-sets. So he also had some downforce load cell pins in there. But he spent $25,000 on his 400 acres. Yes, he didn't make money the first year, but in a 3-year plan, he made $32,000. You know, these are those parts of the 3 to 5 year plan. Do you want this money down here? That's what the meter looks like. That's what the V-drive motor, the electric motor that turns those row units on and off and helps you do variable rate because you can. That's the hydraulic cylinder on the Delta Force. This is the air system on Air Force. You got the airbags that do the down pressure and the pump. And you ask maybe why you would go to Air Force instead of going straight to Delta Force. Delta Force takes some hydraulic supply that maybe some of your tractors wouldn't have. So this is just another way to get some of the same stuff done just without quite the sophistication of the Delta Force. The new monitor, it shows you mapping the field as you go, and then it tells you what your singulation, your ground contact, and all those things are. So, at this point, I'd like to do just a little bit of math. So, let's just pretend somebody here's got the 200 acres. Anybody got a calculator that they can do a little math for us? Can you hear me better now? Yeah. So anyway, got a calculator. 200 acres times oh, so you had me all the time speaking without this. You're on the ball, Justin. I appreciate that. So technology can't help, guys. So anyway, somebody do the math for me. 200 acres times, let's just do the 6 bushels. That's if you just went from finger meters to a precision finger meter.
1,200.
1,200 bushels times, what did you get for corn?
350.
350. What's the number?
4,200.
4,200 bucks. Pretty good investment, pretty good upgrade here. Let's do 200 acres on 16 bushels. This is the biggest spread probably when it comes to planter adjustments. 200 acres, 3,200 bushels.
Yeah.
Yep, $3.50 corn.
No computer involved.
No computer involved. Yeah, that's pretty good, huh?
Brain power.
Times 3.5.
11,200.
11,200. So, you know, my point is that we've often thought of the planter expenditures, the things that we add to the planter as being expensive and that they don't fit for our small farms. And the math says that they easily do. So I guess that's the piece I'd like to leave you guys with, is that these are big numbers. Obviously, just for fun, on soil conditions, I bet you a great deal of us have lost 25 bushels to the acre. So do 25 bushels times 200. 5,000?
500, come on.
500? We can make it bigger.
Every hundred-
Times 3.5.
17,500.
$17,500 on 200 acres. Now, I know you didn't plan every acre that way, guys, but there's a lot of money being left on the table by ignoring some of this. All right. Guess I forgot I left that in there. This is a bunch of things that can help us. These are things that we know work. These are things that you should be talking with your trusted advisor, your salesperson, whatever you prefer to call them, about what can I fix and how can I fix them on my farm. These are things we know work. GMO protection on the crop. If you're not going to GMO protect it, then what are you going to do insecticide-wise to protect the crop at all costs? Nitrogen and sulfur when we're doing side dress, not just one or the other. Fungicide over the top. Pesticides, fungicides in furrow, we know they work, the math's there, it's been done a lot of times. Okay? And now Dean's gonna come up and give us a little bit of what his research
Any
shows.
questions?
Yep.